Rest eternal grant unto them, O Lord, and may light perpetual shine upon them. From the battlefields of World War I come these words from Wilfred Owen's, an anthem for a doomed youth. What passing bells for those who die like cattle. Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries for them from prayers or bells, nor any voice of mourning, save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells. Today's international occasion of solemn remembrance and this holy Requiem Mass for the war dead are a needed, a sacred reminder that wars, both recent and distant, and the sacrifices and costs they have extracted have very much shaped us, where we come from, and our present world. Today is also, and this is of vast consequence, the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. War, it would seem, is an anthropological constant. Wherever you find Homo sapiens, you will find war, or a history of war. There is no culture so noble, so redeemed, so in touch with God or nature that eventually it does not engage in war, if only to protect itself. Because war is ugly through and through, it has been blamed on many things, on religion, arms manufacturers, on world bankers, technology. But the human story itself, from earliest time to this present moment, is scored through and through by war. When it comes to war and peace, a few facts may be kept in mind. Fact one, most wars are not necessary in the end. Similar objectives can almost always be achieved without the massive loss of life and property. Fact two, in war generally, far more non-combatants are injured or killed than those who fight. In fact three, death and battlefield wounds are not the only measure of harm inflicted. Lifelong trauma, dislocation, environmental disaster, economic loss, deprivation. Fact, certain wars are necessary. Sometimes diplomacy and trade in multinational negotiations and all the effort in the world are not enough to halt an aggressor. This morning, in our Mass, we attend to the Great War in particular. At 11 minutes past 11 hours this morning, we mark 100 years since the signing of the Armistice that ended it. H.G. Wells called it the war that will end war, and truly it was like a war like nothing that had come before. By 1940, tensions amidst the European powers had become so great that one assassination led a nation to declare war on another. Others soon followed, and the Great War ensued. Fueled by national expansion and an arms race, the land campaigns occurred primarily in Belgium and France, and later in Italy on the west, and in Poland, Russia, and the Balkan states. on the east, and there were other places. It was truly a world war, fought in multiple theaters with massive multinational alliances. It was also war on an industrial scale, where mass production, resource extraction, and technological development really made their mark on how war was mounted and waged. For the young troops, sailors, and airmen of the Dominion of Canada, it was a first coherent experience of participating in war. We think of the men and youth of this parish who ventured forth, committed to a journey from which some would never return. They were baptized, nurtured, and went to Mass on this site. World War I was a time of enormous challenge for our congregation. Our rector then, Father Henry Collins, was dealing with a financially challenged parish. Some words from a parish memo written in 1917 tell us about the pastoral and practical realities of that time. On April 21st, a Requiem Mass was held for Lieutenant Thomas M. Townsley, who died at Vimy Ridge. I'd like you to follow up on this and also on the names that appear on the memorial tablet that's now in the church porch. As I think of this neighborhood and its past and current makeup, it bears observing that World War I was one of many occasions when, along with Canadians of British or French descent, Aboriginal soldiers would serve side by side with the settlers who had largely displaced them. A time also when servicemen of Chinese, Japanese, Indian, and other backgrounds fought in defense of a nation where they yet were not permitted a vote. We welcome their dignity and their share in the sacrifice of all Canadians at that time, and their generosity in placing common good in which some did not even share above their own good. There was something to World War I, something jarring, disturbing. The trench warfare without productive military objectives, the loss of a generation of youth with all their promise, hope, and beauty. The slaughter of almost 20 million human beings. War poet Siegfried Sassoon described the soldiers' plight then. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. On that first armistice, the world could not have imagined that merely 2 decades later another war would usher in the Holocaust and the world's first use of nuclear weapons. The suffering of war is spread to everyone. Civilian populations and non-combatants routinely are killed, injured, and traumatized, sometimes on purpose. And there are those serving at home, as Evelyn Underhill once observed, speaking for them, "Never of us be said, we had no war to wage." When we think about it, we also must not forget the massive suffering borne by faithful companions, the war animals, who through the centuries have been enlisted in the waging of war. and have shared in war's pitiless cost. They do so even now. The war horses, the dogs, the carrier pigeons, the ship's cats, and others. The persistence of aggression and belligerence among nations is why Canada needs its fighting men and women even today. They who stand at the ready, equipped to work with our partners and our allies to project deterrence and capability in a world rich with extremism, nationalism, and terrorist action. Canada's military are what put the muscle behind shared international will. To intervene against genocide, to keep peace between nations, to join other nations in deterring and in actively opposing aggressors. The current threat environment, very different from the world of World War I, includes nuclear, biological, radiological, cyber, and space-based warfare. It's not all a dream, it's reality. And in a world filled with real and present danger, our highest values can be at stake. Life, health, liberty, civil rights, racial and religious freedoms, family life, safety, friendship, property, our very way of life, culture, the environment, the economy. Although we can and must work to prevent and avoid war, mankind will never be free of war in this life. Because at the end of the day, and this is difficult, the cost of freedom is blood. And that brings us from humanity's sacrifice to God's own sacrifice, from the blood of the fallen to the blood of Jesus Christ. British Lieutenant Wilfred Owen, who we heard from earlier, drew a link between these two sacrifices. One ever hangs where shelled roads part. In this war, he too lost a limb, but his disciples hide apart, and now the soldiers bear with him. In pondering war, is it any wonder that the cross, the symbol of death, would speak so powerfully to the human spirit about our need and longing for transformation? That symbol of mortality by which the man of peace changed death into life. Christ brings transformation and fullness of life to a world so deeply wounded by war. This Mass, this evocative, haunting music which carries it this morning from start to finish, is a bold, confident assertion of life in the face of the inexpressible sacrifice of our war dead, combatants, civilians, and creatures. For it is through these holy mysteries that their lives, their grief and suffering, as well as ours, are joined up to the incarnate Christ, God who has come amongst us, Jesus, whose own life was taken and poured out also in mortal combat, that all of us might be touched by the healing presence of Almighty God. Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine.